Hello, it is the Anfield Wrap. I am Neil Atkinson. Liverpool won the league, and the Anfield Wrap has been brought to you through the season by Peloton, who are the official fitness digital partner of Liverpool Football Club, and we've been proud to partner with them as well. And at some point, I think it was in January or February, and I've got no idea why, because I was pretty confident Liverpool were going to win the league. I said if Liverpool won the league, I would do the whole of the Anfield Wrap show on a Peloton, and that's what's happening right now. So I'm going to select, Beth can keep an eye out here for good order, Arthur's Pass ride in New Zealand. That's what it's called, Arthur's Pass, and hopefully the class is going to start, and from there I'm going to be cycling through Arthur's Pass over the course of this Anfield Wrap show. There's loads of ways you can get involved with us at the Anfield Wrap on Peloton, and we're very, very pleased to be part of all of that. He says lowering the resistance down quite quickly, because my God, that was up high. And we've been, as I say, it's been great to be partnering with them over the course of this fantastic season. So thank you very much to them indeed. Whoever's idea this was, thank you very much to them. I'm not quite sure who. I'm concerned it might have been mine, and I've ended up in this situation. But this Anfield Wrap show is our season review show on the Anfield Wrap format. Last week on Midweek Extra, there was an excellent one with Adam Smith, Amelia and Mo Stewart. If you subscribe to the Anfield Wrap, there's been other ones as things have gone through. I've just been overtaken by a car. We're not going to try and chase it down. That'd be ridiculous. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, there'll be a couple of other season reviews coming out as well. Did a great one on Saturday in the White Hart. I've got with me for this, I've got Josh Williams, I've got Ian Ryan, and I've got Beth Lindop. And I think if I remember rightly, my order for this was Ian first, then Beth, then Josh. Coming up as well, we're going to talk about Keith Kelleher, him leaving Liverpool, and what that means from here, and also his fantastic Liverpool career. And we're going to have a chat about Florian Wirtz. But first and foremost, as I navigate through Arthur's Pass, Ian Ryan, your view on Liverpool's historic league winning season.
It's hard to take you seriously, first of all, on that so high up as well. But yeah, let's just go back to last summer. Obviously, the managerial change. I think everyone was waiting with a fair amount of anticipation just to see how things were going to kind of, play out and progress and stuff. And I have to say, pretty much from day one, I was unbelievably impressed with Slot. I thought he came across ever so well. I think as long as you go into these things with your kind of eyes open and you're not hoping to see some kind of reincarnation of the previous manager, knowing full well that Klopp had been so great for this football club. And I think, if I remember rightly, did Slot almost announce himself before the official Liverpool announcements, which shows a fellow who backs himself clearly, wasn't afraid to kind of put himself out there. And I think very early on you get a sense of that. The Ipswich game and what he does with Quansah will often get referenced on some of these shows. But I think what it did for me was almost just, and I've talked to John about this on a few different shows, but it just put out there very, very early on that his standards were absolutely sky high, and he wasn't going to accept anything less than the very best. And that certainly comes across in that game. And unfortunately for Quansah, he falls foul, and he doesn't really play that bad, to be fair. I don't think it was a really terrible performance. But it was almost just saying to everyone else, if you don't meet this mark, then I'm prepared to make changes. And I think very, very early on in Slot's reign, there was almost this thing where he wasn't going to accept any kind of passengers whatsoever. And I think because of the standards thing, and it's not to say that Klopp didn't have high standards, but I think there were times when the previous manager might indulge one or two players, Trent being a prime example, where because what he gave you offensively, he was willing to put up with some of the defensive stuff. I just don't think that was ever going to be part of Slot's kind of thought process. I think it was very much about, these are the standards, maybe apart from Mohamed Salah, who gets a little bit of wriggle room, everyone else has to meet these in every training session and in every game. And that's how it's kind of played out through the season and stuff. And I think there's a couple of things a manager has to do, more than a couple of things, but there's certain things a manager has to do. I think when he comes into a football club, I think he has to win over hearts and minds, not only of fans, but also of players. And I think very early on, he has that game against Manchester United, which for me felt pivotal. Now, back then, we don't know how the season's going to kind of go for Manchester United, and obviously it goes really, really badly for them. But that was still a big game. That was still a game where Liverpool, even under the previous manager, have struggled at times. But I think what he does that day, he almost shows this tactical flexibility with what he does with Szoboszlai, which immediately gets players on side. Yeah. And I remember something that kind of the Porto players and Chelsea players would say about Mourinho, and they are very different managers, don't get me wrong, but there was almost this ability where, from a tactical point of view, you could predict what was going to happen in the games a lot of the time. And if it didn't quite go to plan, you were then clever enough, cute enough and brave enough to change it mid-game. But I think what you saw that day against Manchester United, and several players have come out and said this, that he was able to almost predict tactically how that game would unfold, and that just gets you buy-in. It just creates buy-in almost immediately from players who are probably going into the campaign thinking, it's going to be a big change this. The previous fella was great, and now we've got this fella who they may have heard of. If I'm being totally honest, until about 2 months before he got the job, I'd never heard of him. And that might be my ignorance and stuff, but I just wasn't across kind of his work and what he'd done. And maybe it sounds a bit silly saying that now, but I remember at the time just thinking, I've not really come across this guy before. But then obviously, once he starts kind of doing his work, you can't fail to be impressed, really. You have to be impressed by what he's doing, because it just feels like he kind of knows exactly what he's about. And I think that was important to almost lay a bit of a marker down. And there's just loads of that in the first half of the season where I think he's just incredibly impressive from a tactical point of view. You know, November, December felt really, really pivotal and really important. You know, there's things against Brighton at home, Fulham at home, where they're up against it a little bit. There's a lot of adversity in those games. You know, Brighton could be 2 or 3 up by half time. They were far the better team. He makes changes second half. Liverpool scored 2 in 2 minutes and win the game. And that felt like a massive one to get over the line. But also, you know, the Fulham game, I just thought the manager was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. To go down to 10 men after 17 minutes, to go behind twice in the game. The second time was like with 15 minutes to go. And I think there's a lot of times where when it goes against you like that, so close to the end, you could almost understand it if just people just chuck the chips in a little bit, including the manager on the touchline, thinking, well, it's not our day today. But it was just one of those things where the whole team kept going. He was brilliant on the touchline, tweaks from pretty much as soon as Robbo goes off. That helped Liverpool get a valuable point that day. But I just think throughout the first half of the campaign, there was loads of them doing that, almost kind of making tactical changes that see Liverpool get points when you think maybe it might go a different way. And then other kind of key moments in that period I mentioned, November, December time, it just felt like to get over the line against City and Madrid, again, tells a little bit of a story to the fans, to the players, where you can go up against these other great managers and get results. And they beat Madrid, they beat City. I think those games as well are a bit of a kind of pointer to, whilst you may think you're relying on 15 or 16 players, there are just times through the season where other people just come to the party and step up. And we're going to talk about Kelleher a bit later on, Neil, but he plays in both of those games, Madrid and City, and he has really big moments in both of them. Obviously saves the penalty from Mbappe, but also bails out his captain very, very late in the day when it is 2-0. But if that goes 2-1 with 10 to go, it could be a different scenario, and you don't kind of want those pressure points in matches. So again, a point to him. You know, Gomez plays in that City game as well. You know, only plays 9 league games, but I think the bits where he does come in, he does pretty well in the main. So it's just a real reminder that yes, there are mainstays, but there are also lads who just come to the party when you really, really need them to step up. And January was a big one for that, where Nunes gets the kind of the 2 against Brentford in a game that just felt incredibly important, especially given what then happens with Arsenal later in the day. But that for me might just be the moment of the season where if you're in any doubt whether Liverpool were capable of getting over the line, that just almost put another flag down to say, we are going to win this one, we are going to get this one done. And that just felt huge in the course of the campaign. And Nunes, again, a guy who has split opinion, but for 3 or 4 minutes, there's been a lot to deal with in this first half, I'm not going to lie.
You've done a great job, Ian.
Absolutely.
There's Josh up and down, there's been a lot going on. But for Nunes to do that felt incredibly special. For him, I was pleased for him, because I've been someone who's been a bit critical of him this season, and I think most of that criticism has been fair, because I don't think he's helped himself. But for 4 or 5 minutes, he absolutely comes to the party. He plays a huge part, and I think a lot of the players have gone on to say at the end of the season that might just have been the game where everyone to a man fully believed that this was going to happen, and he gets to have that day. And it's not just him, Elliot comes off the bench, Gazer comes off the bench, the manager's throwing forwards on left, right and centre to get it done. But yeah, that's not everyone can be Mohamed Salah, but for those 3 or 4 minutes, Darwin Núñez must have felt incredible because he plays such a significant part in getting Liverpool the 3 points. And then I won't talk loads more about the games, but Man City towards the end of the campaign just stood out as well. Mainly because it was very unusual in a sense of Liverpool had so little possession. But I just thought for 65, 70 minutes, Mohamed Salah just served up a performance that was just from the gods. It was unbelievable. Everything was perfect. Every pass, every layoff, every touch, it was just gold. And then, listen, it tails off a little bit towards the end because of everything that not only the team have given, but he's given. Because everything he did that day, for all the brilliance, it was backed up by hard work and graft. Yeah. And you've not always seen that from Salah because he doesn't always have to do it. But that day, he was prepared to do it for the greater good. And again, in a time where they'd had the derby results, you're just a little bit conscious of that. There's the Villa draw as well. To go to City and just dominate in a fashion where you're not in control of the football, but it was almost never in doubt that you were going to win that match. And then you fast forward towards the end of the season and you get the Spurs thing, you get the Palace thing. Both of those games were unbelievably special for obvious reasons because of the weight and the desire to see the big fella lift it. And everything that surrounded those 2 matches. I don't think you could script it in a much better way. Even though they don't get the win against Palace, it didn't really matter. But everything around that game, leading up to it, during it, and what followed post-match with the celebrations outside the stadium, and what each of us got to experience with, friends, family, all of that stuff. If you were kind of writing it down on a piece of paper, you probably wouldn't have been writing it down any different to how it actually kind of unfolded.
In the round then, there's a couple of specific bits that I want to sort of come back on to, but in the round for you, on a personal level, working through the season, was it, genuinely, is it as special now as is being billed across the board? Was it that spectacular?
Yeah, I think you'd have to say that. I think when you kind of live and breathe the season, what I often do with some of these kind of review shows, and I've done a few of them now, but I didn't do it this time, but I will always go back and listen to shows at the start of the season, primarily the show that I host, the pre-match warm-up, just to almost gauge how I'm feeling back in August, but how others are feeling as well, because I think it's easy to forget 9.5 months, just how things develop. But I don't think for 1 second I thought Liverpool were going to win a title this season. They may have been there or thereabouts, and I would have assumed they'd still get top 4 because of the players. But I don't think you can underestimate just how difficult it is for a new manager following the guy who's been, as I said before, brilliant, won everything. And you've got to get your coaching methods across. You've got to bring players along on the journey. You've got to get them to buy into it. You've got to get fans to buy into it. You've got to navigate a new league. You're doing it without any new players, bar one, who doesn't really feature. If you'd have told me the guy was going to come in and deliver in his first year with all of that I've just mentioned, I think it's hard to say. Like, that would have gone the way it went, because it's such an ask. It's such a job. There's very few managers who've come in, if we're going to talk Premier League for a minute, and been able to win it in the first season without spending any cash whatsoever, pretty much. But Slot did that. It's testament to his coaching capability, I think. It's no surprise that, when people have looked at his players previously when he was at Feyenoord and have said, well, you can't judge those players too much because it's all down to the manager. You can understand where that come from and why that was a thing, because he has just delivered time and time again. I think, perfection from a tactical point of view. Listen, there are one or two things where you think it could have gone a little bit differently and you would have liked it to have gone a bit differently. I think, the European stuff, they're just a little bit unfortunate that they ran into a machine like PSG so early on. And I said on the show at the time, I thought he probably would go out at that moment. But, this is not a one-season thing for the manager. You'd imagine next season there's a European campaign which sees Liverpool go far deeper.
A couple more things from me before I bring Beth and Josh in. Ian, the first thing that hits me as you're going through, and I haven't done a couple of these now, one of the things that shifts season on season, I think, or the task as it has been, is draws were all right. this season, they were actually almost useful. And I think that took a bit of getting used to for a few of us, because we're used to that Man City battle of a draw is 2 dropped and you're going to get yourself in real trouble. But I thought that now when you look back on the sweep of the season, Liverpool are unbeaten for 7 months. And you mentioned the Fulham game there before, you mentioned a couple of the 2-2s. In the grand scheme now, they feel like good results, they feel like good points. And maybe, just maybe, that could be the new normal going forwards.
Yeah, it might be, because I think, we've lived in an era where it's not been a thing, and therefore that affects your mood, kind of. I think when you're trying to analyse games, if you've drawn, you're instantly thinking, certainly when it was Klopp v Guardiola, you're thinking, oh, fucking hell, this is going to be really hard now, because you haven't got many of them in a season. You certainly can't lose many, but you can't draw many. And we've seen seasons, Neil, where, draws have killed us in the past, so you are a little bit scarred.
Yeah, wait till 9, even it goes all the way back to that, doesn't it?
That's what I was thinking of. You are scarred by previous battles, really, where you think, well, yeah, draws can kill you. But then Liverpool do get to a position in the league where it never really feels like anyone's going to get near them. And I know we debated Arsenal and stuff on many shows, and certainly the first part of the season you're very, very conscious of what they're doing, but by the time it does get to that January, February point, they're pretty much done and dusted as a force. Liverpool, it's unless anything mad happens, it's well within their grasp, and that's how it plays out. And yeah, it may well be that, because I think next season there's a lot of teams over the course of the summer who've got work to do, so whether they're then capable of putting 90 plus seasons together, again, it's been referenced, Arsenal, I've only ever done it once, I think, so that's going to be a big step for a lot of those teams to be able to put seasons together where they're 90 plus points.
Last thing then is, as I said before, to bring Beth and Josh in, the other thing that hit me was you talked up the 2-0 against City away. You talked up Salah's performance that day. Manager's quite critical of it, second half, doesn't feel like they look after the ball enough. I wondered if now, in the context of, again, having seen the end of the season, that with that game, is there a little bit of a thing there where that becomes the start of, we were 2-0 up at half-time against Man City, the metaphor of carrying the vase across the crowded room? Because if you think about that game, the one after it's Southampton, I think, in the league, no, there's Newcastle, then there's Southampton, and then we're into that funny little run, I think, where you'd be fair to say they don't play brilliantly, but they just keep finding a way to get it done. They get ahead, they hang on. And I sort of wonder whether or not the manager, because his standards are up here, and he's not lived these lads as reality, and Van Dijk's the captain, and he's like, we don't fuck this up. And I wonder if there's a bit of conflict there, that now that they've won one, it might see next season be a little bit different. Yeah,
possibly. I think sometimes if you listen to, like, kind of, ex-pros talk and stuff, they'll be like, only too aware what the manager's instructions are, but sometimes when you're like living and breathing the game, you've just got to like go with how the game's unfolding, and you can all very well say keep hold of the ball more, but fucking hell, if there's certain things going on in the game state, you just got to deal with it sometimes. So he was very clear after that match that he wouldn't want to see Liverpool play like that too often in terms of conceding possession so readily, but you've got to appreciate what you're up against. And I know it wasn't the City of previous years, but they are still very, very capable of holding onto the ball and dominating possession. That's what, yeah, exactly. That's what Guardiola's teams do. I'm thinking here right now, I don't remember the goalkeeper having to do a great deal. So it's all very well having possession, but you're not going to do anything with it. Then I think the likes of Virgil and others would have been absolutely fine that day. And I think, Mohamed Salah spoke before, he understood the assignment that day completely. It was, yes, go out and be brilliant, but actually, from a work ethic point of view, he was at it as much as anyone, I thought. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I think the manager will want Liverpool to play differently in big games, but sometimes it's horses for courses. Josh, anything on what Ian said there that's stuck out to you?
I think the managerial stuff is interesting to me. You mentioned there that he kind of announced while he was at Feyenoord that he's like the next Liverpool boss. And if you remember at that time, he was getting compared, wasn't he, to like Brendan Rodgers and that. People were getting ahead of themselves, chatting that like he's another one who was obsessed with the ball, a bit utopian maybe in his perspective on possession-based football and all that. He's already talking that he's got the job before he comes in, and I think we would all agree that he's been virtually perfect. But I don't know about. I mean, I'm going to get into it when I do my one. But from your perspective, was there any like? I think outside Liverpool, there's been a lot of people who've been shocked by. I don't want to say how little of an impact Jurgen was having, but you just, I think a lot of coaches would have been able to manage this Liverpool team to 80 points plus, basically, is what I'm getting at. I think looking at what Slot's done, have you been surprised, basically, versus like the Jurgen hangover, if you get what I mean. Look at what happened with Wenger, look at what happened with Ferguson. I think everyone anticipated, a lot of people inside Liverpool as well anticipated a bit of a drop purely because Jurgen was leaving, even though he never kicked a single ball. How's your take been on that?
Yeah, I think that's what I was alluding to before, because I just think, I understand when people say, well, all the players are still the same, and it was a plus 80 point season last year. Obviously, they fall off a cliff towards the end. But I just think when you're dealing with like personalities, different players who've kind of existed under a previous manager, where it is, I think, quite different. Certainly in terms of Jurgen's personality, I think to then come in and just almost bring that group together, galvanise them, and to deliver the performances on the pitch pretty much from day one, then I think that's just sensational stuff. I don't think the managers had enough credit. I know he gets the LMA award, the League Managers Association award at the end of the season for the Manager of the Year. I expected him to get that because he wins the league. But I just thought through the course of the season, he never really got the credit that he probably deserved, to be honest. There's a lot of revisionism around fans talking Liverpool down towards the end of the last campaign, but then all of a sudden talking them up, saying, well, of course he was going to do well, he's got Jurgen's squad. Well, that wasn't a lot of the chat towards the end of the season, you know what I mean? I remember it clearly, like everyone, to a man, pundits, fans, they all thought Liverpool would be nowhere near it. Some had them outside the top four. I know we can mock that a little bit when you look at what Gary Neville's predicted and stuff like that, but there was a lot of people who thought Liverpool would not be in and around the top four, just because I think there's almost an understanding that it does take a lot of time to kind of to integrate yourself into a bigger club. I thought it was quite interesting with the manager that sometimes, I know he doesn't really sign any players, but quite often what you'll see when a new manager joins another club, and this is back to the standards thing, they'll bring lads with them from the previous club. They'll go, well, I'll bring one or two because I know what they're like. The good lads off the pitch, they've got good work ethic, decent on the ball, whatever it may be. They'll bring a couple in.
I hate it when that happens.
But it happens a lot. But I think it's back to a standards thing, where the manager clearly knew. I'm sure he rated what he was doing back in Holland and the teams he was up against, but he's made a few references to the quality of the league compared to this one. But I think he was under no illusion straight away, and that's why it was like, there's a standards thing in the Premier League, and there's a standards at Liverpool. And unfortunately, whilst I would have liked some of those players, or I did like them, they're not going to be able to cut it here. And there was no talk, there was no chat of it, was there? He wasn't really linked to anyone, bringing them along just to be part of it. So I think it all comes back to, if you want to play for this football club, if you want to represent them, then you're going to have to be absolutely tip-top. So yeah.
Beth, anything?
Yeah, I think obviously I completely agree with you. I think there was a lot of talk last summer about Liverpool perhaps being at the end of a cycle, and like the same players who people have now said, like you say, obviously Mohamed Salah, he of course he's going to have a great season, but actually back in the last season that wasn't the talk. So I think he has absolutely defied expectations to do what he's done this season. How much more difficult will his job be next season, do you think? Because now Liverpool do have a target on the backs a little bit. There's no surprises. People know he's a great manager. Do you think next season it will be more of a challenge, or do you think, potentially with it 3, 4, 5 of his own signings, Liverpool could be even better? Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because with success comes expectation. I think he's done a lot of the hard things in terms of getting people on board. So you mentioned Salah there. I think there would have been, I think Virgil and Salah and maybe one or two others, Alisson, would have been looking and thinking, right, you need to get me on side a little bit here to an extent. I'm sure, they're all professionals and stuff, but I think he does that really well. Brings Salah into a room, talks about what his expectations are, but listens to Salah as well. And then they come to kind of some kind of mutual ground in terms of what they expect both from each other, really. I think the ability to go into the market should help him, because you get to stamp your own kind of footprint on the team a little bit more. So that should help him. But we know from previous kind of years watching football, across different leagues, sometimes it doesn't always pan out that way. You get to bring players in, it doesn't always go to plan, and people can come in and upset the apple cart and stuff. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think people will obviously be expecting Liverpool to be, there or thereabouts again, obviously. They'll be expecting them to do a bit better in Europe, but the caveats are if they come up against PSG. But yeah, it should be a little bit easier, because I think he'll have learnt loads, I think, in this first kind of 9-10 months. And I think there's almost this thing now where there'll be a lot of players around Europe who will be desperate to be part of something. So I think if Liverpool come knocking on your door, there's a fair old chance that you're going to be interested, and that should certainly help the manager just get 1 or 2 in where he feels he can add a little bit. And I think there's some good footballers at Liverpool already, but I would not be surprised if there's maybe 1 or 2 outgoings or 1 or 2 lads next season that don't see as much football as we think they might. And it's just back to, if there's any marginal gain somewhere, I think this manager's prepared to make those decisions, even if they're a little bit harsh, they seem a bit, hang on, we really like that player. And the manager might like him as well. But if he thinks he can get another 5 or 10% elsewhere, and I think that sometimes there's maybe the difference between him and Jurgen. Not that Jurgen didn't have those standards, but I think Jurgen would be more inclined maybe to just have that loyalty a little bit more with certain players for maybe a little bit too long. I don't think you'll see that with Slot. I think if there's room for improvements, he'll make those decisions.
Okay, next up, thank you very much to Ian. Next up, Beth Lindop, ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've got to say you've navigated that very... I didn't realise how many cars you would be coming up against, but you've a camper van came right past you at one point and you just glided
just dealt with it. So stay calm.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate this season. It's been sort of my first season covering Liverpool full time, and couldn't have really picked a better season to do it. Not saying that I've been the common denominator in Liverpool winning a league title, but so I started at ESPN in November, and so my first 2 games that I covered were Real Madrid and Manchester City, so it was sort of straight in at the deep end. And sort of prior to that, I'd been doing a few bits for the Echo, so I'd sort of been, I'd been to a few press conferences and things like that. But it was from November that I was really sort of in the thick of it, I guess. And I think that the thing that struck me straight away, and obviously Ian's already talked about it, but it was just how impressive Slot was. That the responsibility and the pressure taken over from someone like Jurgen, not just on the pitch, but I think as much off the pitch as well. We know how good Jurgen was almost as a statesman and as a representative of the city, and to come in and to try and take over from that, it is no mean feat. But I think, there was a press conference, I think, in maybe, I think it was before a Champions League game in October. And I remember he Slot said something about, we don't accept mediocrity at Liverpool. And there were a few of us sat in the room who just sort of looked at each other, and it was almost like, this guy is the real deal. And I think what Slot has done brilliantly this season is he's struck that balance between respecting what has come before in terms of acknowledging the help that he has been given by the foundations that Jurgen has laid, but also not being overawed or feeling in any way inferior. I think the ultimate example of that is after the Tottenham game when he starts Klopp's name. I mean, that was a day where he had every right to sort of be at the very centre of attention, and I think it takes someone who is incredibly comfortable in their own skin and confident of their own abilities to acknowledge what Jurgen did, and for me that just sort of sets the tone and sort of sums up what he's been like all season, and again sort of having been in press conferences and things and around the training centre. I think what you've seen over the course of the season is a manager who is becoming more and more sort of comfortable and confident in the job. I think even sort of the way that the little dad jokes that he's got creeping into press conferences, I think they became more frequent by the end of the season. But again, I think that speaks of somebody who is who feels like he now can have that little bit of a rapport. And I think that's really struck me, from speaking to various people. We did a piece at ESPN a couple of months back where we sort of spoke to people, fans, ex-players, players who've played under him, his former teammates, and everyone sort of said the same thing. And everything that was said about him was overwhelmingly positive. And even sort of a couple of our colleagues over in the Netherlands sort of, that they got back to us and they said, well, we've been trying to find people who can sort of offer a little bit of an alternative view, but we literally can't get anyone to say anything negative about him, which is probably a good indication of a pretty fantastic character. But sort of from speaking to people, I think that the common thread is that, he's incredibly focused, he's incredibly meticulous, his attention to detail is and always has been sort of second to none. Even back when he was a player, he was someone who was trying to constantly innovate. He had one of my favourite quotes that we heard from someone who worked with him was that he used to have a database that was basically full of videos, facts, statistics from all the top teams across Europe, and he'd constantly be looking at that and adding to that. And he was also, Pep Guardiola was sort of at the forefront of that. He'd be sat for hours and hours watching Pep Guardiola's Manchester City and his Barcelona and his Bayern Munich. And I think, you can see, and you've started to see over the course of the season, that there's little bits of different managers that he's brought into Liverpool's game. But I think the nice thing is he's not necessarily tried to replicate, he's not tried to copy what Manchester City do. He's not tried to model Liverpool on anyone else. He sort of made them, little influences from elsewhere. But again, I think it comes back to someone who very much is keen to have his own style, but is also flexible. I think sort of Ian referenced earlier, but there was an interview with Mo Salah, I think it was with Gary Neville toward the back end of the season, and he said one of the things that impressed him most was that Slot never tried to. You get some managers, I think we've sort of seen it with Ruben Amorim at Manchester United, where it's sort of my way or the highway, and they're very much wedded to a system, and they have to sort of stick with that. But what Slot has done is shown a willingness to adapt, and whether that be sort of adapting in game or sort of week to week and depending on the opponent, I think we've really seen that. So yeah, in terms of as far as the manager is concerned, been so impressed with him as a person and as a coach. I think he's been fantastic. And then just to touch on a few of the players, I think probably the player that we've all been most surprised by this season is Ryan Gravenberch, and it's easy to forget just how close we came to, I guess, not seeing him in the way that we've seen him this season. Had that deal for Martin Zubimendi gone through last summer, because Liverpool obviously were massively interested in him. And listen, he might have come in and been great for Liverpool. We know obviously he's now looking like he's heading to Arsenal, and we'll get to see what he's like in the Premier League. But I think it's a good thing for as far as I'm concerned, that he didn't come last summer, because I think in Gravenberch playing in that role, we've just sort of seen an absolute gem. And it's been such a privilege, I think, for all of us to see that the journey that he's been on this season. And I've touched on it on a number of shows, but my first proper feature that I did for ESPN back in November was a piece on Gravenberch, and I spoke to sort of his old coaches and spoke to his dad. And
his dad loves Arne Slot more than anyone else.
His dad loves Arne Slot more than anyone else. I think that is my again, I've mentioned it before, but one of my favourite quotes from the whole season was his dad saying, we're God-believing people, and we believe that God has sent Arne to Liverpool, which, I mean, I'm not sure you can get higher praise than that, really. But his dad was just so proud of him, and I think, I said this a couple of weeks ago, but, you can forget at times that these players are human beings with families and normal lives, and, they're just normal lads when they get off the pitch, because they're just so talented, and they you sort of hold them up as being almost ethereal, otherworldly beings. But then his dad said something really nice about he was coming off the pitch one day, I think it was a game earlier on in the season, and he got subbed off. He'd had a great performance, and the fans start singing his name, and his dad said he just broke down in tears, because Anfield were on the feet, and he said they were doing that for my boy. And I think the way that Slot has been able to turn his career around, I guess, because I mean his family were very complimentary about Jurgen Klopp, and they credit Klopp with doing a lot of the sort of the groundwork for what he's been able to do this season. But it is Arne Slot who was giving him that chance, and he's obviously seized it with both hands. And I don't think it's a coincidence that sort of both him and Cody Gakpo as well have really flourished this season. I think that Dutch connection, it can sound a little bit sort of naff to say that that's why they've been so good this season, and obviously there's a number of reasons, but I think that has really helped. I think that communication, that clarity in vision has really, really helped the both of them. So yeah, I think I've been so impressed with him, so impressed with so many of the team. I mean, that midfield, I think the balance of Alexis McAllister, Dominic Szoboszlai and Gravenberch. It's probably been the best balanced midfield in the Premier League, hasn't it, this season? And I think, it will be interesting to see what that midfield looks like next season. It'll be interesting if Florian Wirtz gets over the line where he plays, whether he ends up playing as a more advanced, sort of the most advanced midfielder, whether he plays as a false nine or further forwards. It'll be interesting to see. But I think, they've been a joy to watch this season. And then sort of just finally to touch on for me, probably aside from the manager, the two biggest factors in why they've been so successful this season in Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk. I think, again, it comes back to sort of what Ian said earlier on about sort of the revisionism as the season has gone on, and people at the back end of last season sort of writing Liverpool off a little bit, and I think Mo Salah was probably at the forefront of that. He obviously has the back end of last season a really tough time, doesn't he? He struggles with probably his longest injury I think he's had during his whole time at Liverpool, and I think it just speaks to the kind of character he is, that he's almost took that sort of a little bit of criticism personally, and he's obviously gone away over the summer. The manager said what fantastic shape he came back in, and I think it struck me from the very beginning how determined he was to make the season a success. I think it was the after the season finished last year, he puts that post out where he says he wants to fight like hell to make Liverpool win the Premier League, and it is almost like he has made that his personal mission this season, to go out and do that. And so for him to have gone and produced the numbers, produced the performances that he has been incredible. And then at the other end of the pitch, you've got Virgil, and again, sort of probably the player that I've dealt the most with this season, purely because he's the one that stops and deals with the media as the most frequently. And again, I've said this before, but he's under no obligation to ever do that. He doesn't have to stop and speak to reporters after the game. But I think the thing that struck me with Virgil is that you couldn't really ask for a better club captain. I think he's really grown into that role this season. I used to sort of think sometimes with Jordan Henderson and James Milner, sort of how vocal they were. I think you could tell when they weren't on the pitch, and I used to think that actually Virgil maybe wasn't the best choice for captain. But I think absolutely happy to have been proved wrong. And I think this season, what he's done on and off the pitch, how classy he is, how well he conducts himself, how well he represents the club, and how much he understands the club and the city is really special and really unique, I think. So he's been a pleasure to deal with, and obviously great to see both him and Mo staying for another 2 years.
Okay, so the first thing that sticks out when you talk about the manager and his plans and the way he wants to play football, but then coming with the reality, the thing I kept saying through the season was how clear-eyed he appeared to be. That other managers were committed to decisions they made in the summer. I think you can maybe make that argument around Arteta, but to me it felt as though week in, week out, Slot had a real clear sense of the standard of what he was coming up against and also how to deal with it. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think, he's been sort of unequivocal, hasn't he, in constantly sort of reiterating how tough this league is and how different it is to the Dutch league. He said a couple of times the sort of players that you get playing for teams 17th, 16th in the Premier League, you'd probably be starting for teams right at the top of the Eredivisie. So I think he has been, like you say, Neil, completely clear-eyed in his assessment of the league and the challenge that he's been up against. But I also think he's learnt so much. I think that's the really exciting thing. I think we've seen as the weeks have gone on. This was his first time, I guess, working without a winter break. Yeah. I think maybe having seen how things went in February, March time next year, we might see a little bit of a difference in terms of the amount he rotates. I think it'll be interesting as well. I mean, it was a learning curve for everyone, wasn't it? The Champions League, the new format, and we didn't quite know how many games you needed to win and how much of an advantage it would give you finishing top. We now know it gives you virtually no advantage, really.
Well, the second, third and fourth teams made the semi-finals, which I think is quite interesting. I think because of us, we've sort of ignored that, and the team that won it beat us and we came first.
Yeah, that is true. But I think, it'll be interesting to see how he approaches those group stage games next season. I think there will feel like less of an onus on needing to win as many of them. I think obviously you want to avoid a position where you're dropping into those playoffs, because I think that was obviously an advantage not having to play those 2 games. But I think beyond that, I think you can probably afford to lose a couple and not.
You can come 7th.
You can come 7th, yeah. And it'll be sod's law that Liverpool will come 7th, and they'll end up coming up against PSG again or Barcelona or whatever. So, it's probably quite hard to work out who you're going to get. But I just think there's been so many lessons that I think he's probably learned over the course of the season, and it's exciting now because I think he is someone who does want to learn and is someone who, if he makes a mistake, he doesn't tend to make the same mistake twice. I think he will have taken a lot of learning from the season, and I think it'd be interesting to see next season how that informs his decision making.
Just on sticking on the theme of the manager, I think one of the things that's been really striking this season is his honesty right through the campaign. He will kind of tell it how it is. Is there any kind of sense from you that the players are really, really on board with that in terms of how he sometimes does it publicly? I know Trent was obviously leaving the club. I can't imagine he was, overjoyed by the manager talking about his kind of training performances. But he has talked about Salah as well. He seems to reserve like special praise for just 1 or 2 players. Like the goalkeeper gets a lot, Virgil gets loads. Other than that, no one really gets that much. Do you think Dave embraced the kind of almost the way he is in press conferences and way he is with kind of the press, and he will like give them probably a lot more than what Jurgen would?
Yeah, I think it's probably easier for them to buy into that because of how successful he's been this season. I think if a manager comes in and starts saying all of that stuff and then doesn't back it up with being very good at his job, then I think players might be like, actually, where do you get off saying this about me? So, it'll be interesting to see sort of how that develops as he, the longer he's at Liverpool, and I'm sure there'll be bumps in the road and how he handles that. But yeah, he has been honest, but probably maybe, no, I don't want to say too honest, because
I like it personally.
I like it. And to be fair, I think the players like it. I do, Mo Salah has said a couple of times, the manager has been quite honest with him, and even Trent Alexander-Arnold, I'm sure, as you say, he wasn't probably too pleased with some of those comments toward the back end of the season, but he spoke earlier in the season about how much he enjoyed the manager being tough on him. And I think we did see, certainly in that first half of the season, I think Trent's defending probably did improve slightly, and I think he maybe was one of those who benefited from that slight bit of tough love. But I think the nice thing with him actually is there is this sort of stereotype, I guess, of Dutch managers coming in, and obviously he came into the club at a time when Ten Hag was sort of on the brink of crisis at Manchester United. And I think the thing with Ten Hag, obviously didn't watch him anywhere near as much in terms of press conferences and things, but he never really struck me as having much warmth. And I think, as a fan base and as players as well, particularly if you're following someone like Jurgen, who was just sort of so warm, it was probably quite a departure having someone who isn't quite like that. But I think what I've liked about Slot is he struck that balance between he isn't Jurgen, and he is a little bit more blunt and a little bit more honest and a little bit more ruthless. But I do think there is still a warmth to him, and I still think, if you're a player, he's still probably someone that you could look at, and if you did need him to put his arm around you and stuff, I think he still does have that. So I think that's what I've quite liked. I think he's been honest, but there is still a warmth to him, and I think that has been really important.
Okay, last season review, Josh Williams.
I feel like I'm about to accept an award here. I didn't know that we did this. I didn't know that this was the approach to season reviews. I've never done one of these before, so I didn't expect to be given a full-on speech. But I'll do my best. Some of the stuff Beth said then resonated with me a little bit with the personal side. I've obviously been in the industry for a few years. I think it's about 6 or 7 now. But this is my first season covering Liverpool as like an independent writer or journalist or substacker or content creator, whatever you want to call me, really.
Just all-round sound dude.
Yeah, jack of all trades, master of none. But I've enjoyed it though. I've enjoyed the journey of I've kind of approached it as like a journaling almost. Like one thing I found frustrating previously, I was pretty much working for the Echo really, and I found it frustrating if you're say you wrote a piece touching on something specific, like something how Liverpool won a game or something Liverpool struggled with or whatever. You couldn't then really follow up on that with, well, this is what happened next, and then this is what happened next. It would just be like an isolated piece that I'd get lost. And I was never previously in control of the cover images or the headlines and like that, so I could write a really detailed piece on, like, you know, how Arne Slot is tactically maximising Mohamed Salah, and it'll get titled Mohamed Salah breaks leg or something like that, just so that people click on it, and it worked, you know. But it was never really, my stuff got lost, I always felt. So going into this season, I wanted to do it as like a journey where you are journaling, specifically touching on like the tactical and the data-driven elements of Liverpool's season. So from the off, it was just really interesting time with Jurgen leaving and then replacing him with a new manager. Straight away, there's loads to talk about. There's pre-season bits in there where players are playing in different spots. You know, Gravenberch as a 6, for example. You know, we didn't really see that one coming. So there's been just loads to talk about in that sense throughout the season. That it's almost been like a bit of a perfect storm for me, with like interest in Liverpool and Liverpool being really good and there being loads of talking points that has allowed me to kind of build a bit of a following, a bit of a subscriber base, and yeah, just kind of take supporters on that journey really throughout the season. And there's been loads of stories out there. What Ian mentioned earlier about going back and checking what you thought at the start of the season, I did that the other day on my Substack though, and I said Liverpool's floor was 3rd. Couldn't get any worse than that in my opinion, and I felt Liverpool were in with a shout. I think I described us as underdogs, and I think this is generally my perspective on a league title win. Generally, like, I think if you're about an 85-point team, you can win the league in any season really. I think it was Ian Graham who did the numbers on that, and I think he said you'll generally finish within about 7 points of where you deserve to be.
Yep.
So if you're an 85-point team, you could end up with anywhere in the region between 78 and 92 or something like that. That's
100% agree with that, by the way.
Yeah, so do I, 100%. Yeah, but that's a hell of a range when you think about it. Despite being the same team, that's your range that you can have just based on, like, you know, things that can happen, randomness, variance, penalties, red cards,
injuries,
yeah. Early in the season, when Odegaard gets injured, Rodri does his ACL, people should have been putting bets on Liverpool to win the league, because they're serious losses. And I know people don't want to talk about that sort of thing. People like to think Liverpool have done this themselves, and listen, they have, but Liverpool have benefited from constant availability from 3 irreplaceable players for me in Salah and Van Dijk and Gravenberch. They're the 3 for me that you couldn't really. There was no support acts in place for any of them, and they've played virtually every single game. The injuries that we have had, you know, Alisson goes out, Kelleher just comes in, Trent goes out, Bradley just comes in. So it's just been a really steady, really interesting season where we've just been consistently the best team. Me and you have looked at the numbers every single week, and that's been emphasised in the numbers.
If anything's been stretched, which I think is interesting, it's been like, you know, I think around November you're going, well, it's this and this. By the time you get to March, the gap between Liverpool and Arsenal, let alone anyone else, has got bigger. Yeah,
and there's been lots of touching already from Ian and Beth on the tactical side of Slot's game, and that's perfectly suited to what I like to cover. You know, I don't like to talk about refereeing or, you know, noise in the stands or anything like that, or, you know, historic records between Liverpool and Everton or something. I like to talk about what's happening on the pitch, and Slot's really interesting with that. He gives me a lot of lines to touch on where Liverpool have made specific little tweaks for certain games and thrived because of it. And it's just been one of those seasons where there's been a ton, you know, and unlocking Salah, by the way, has been, I think, a key behind it as to why Liverpool have got over the line in the end. You know, I think towards the back end of Klopp's time, he invests in Núñez, and I do think he tried to shift the attack a little bit towards him as the man for the next generation, if you want, you know, the tip of the spear. And I think the shift made sense, but the player didn't live up to the bill. didn't grab the mantle if you want. And Slot's come in, fresh pair of eyes, no loyalty to Nunes, and just looked at it and, well, who's my best player? It's Salah. Right, won everything through him then. And that's what he's done. You know, he's given the license that he doesn't have to defend. And there's just been so much in there throughout the season, and seeing certain like subscribers of mine at the match and things like there was a park at Nugent Park usually when I'm going to the game, and there was a point where I parked there, go to the traffic lights, walking to Anfield, and there's a lad stood next to me at the lights, and he's looking in my direction. So I looked at him like that, and he went, "Are you distance travelled?" And I went, "Distance covered." he went, yeah. And I just walked the game talking to him about like the stuff that I've been producing for the season and that. But Liverpool doing well is really important for the likes of myself as an independent, you know, and you'll know with the Anfield Wrap as well. Interest ramps up the better the team is, and the more there is to talk about and stuff like that. So as a first season, it's genuinely been virtually perfect for me, really. I mean, Liverpool go and win it with people in the stadium. You can celebrate it outside the stadium. Man United the 15th. Man City go trophyless. Arsenal go trophyless despite being the best team in the world. So it's just been a perfect storm. Liverpool haven't signed any players, and now they're signing an absolute ton of them. So yeah, it's been brilliant.
Okay, just dead quick on it then. From the, not least I'm conscious I want to talk about Kelleher. From the position of, you said before about the floor being third, and I think that I agreed with you. I agree with you then. I agree with you now. That was to say, I think we were using similar methodology. But why do you think that's missed? That people couldn't see that Liverpool's floor was third, if you see what I mean? Is it as simple as mythology of the manager? Is it as simple as a lot of people just would quite like Liverpool not to have done very well and a sort of a bit of wish fulfillment? Why do you think that you were very adamant Liverpool's floor was third and a lot of other people's wasn't the case? Who were paid to talk about football? I don't care about Joe Public.
I think this is going to sound a bit patronising maybe, but I think generally speaking across the board, and you see this with ex-players who've won so many trophies, and this is going to sound mad coming from a lad who's just like sat in Liverpool on a podcast, but I think so many people don't understand what goes into how to win a game of football. I think it's like it's a probability thing as far as I'm concerned. It's not just like a random fluke event. It's not like Roy Keane, I always think, describes it as like a war. You'd think he was describing a battle on a field, but as opposed to like a game that involves strategy and there's so much probability behind it and things like that. So I think that is a starting point for it, and I think Liverpool's numbers generally throughout the course of the season and last season have always been just really in favour of the team. Like if you think of then the example I always use is if you think of yourself and your mate in a five-a-side pitch, and you have 15 shots and he has 5, and you play him every week, and you're a better striker of the ball as well, and you're better in goal. A lot has to go wrong for you to lose 2 on a bounce, but that's the probability Liverpool are dealing with every single week, because we take on average double the number of shots as the opposition. We've got better strikers of the ball, and we've got a better goalkeeper. So that's generally how it works week to week. And I think Liverpool losing Jurgen Klopp was massive in the media, at least. I think initially Klopp was really important, but as we started to recruit elite players, the importance of Klopp as like just turning water into wine.
And he thought that himself, which I always think is interesting. Jurgen would over and over again say, I'm not the greatest coach in the world. And especially as Liverpool got closer and closer to the pinnacle.
Yeah, well, over the course of a period of time, Klopp, like, I don't know if he, accidentally said it, but he labels Alisson as the best goalkeeper in the world, Robertson is the best left back in the world, Trent is the best right back in the world, Van Dijk is the best centre half in the world, Fabinho is the best holding player in the world, and Mohamed Salah is the best forward in the world, Bobby is the best false 9 in the world. You can't just say all that and then paint an underdog story. He did somehow, brilliant at doing it. But I never felt Liverpool were underdogs. I always felt Liverpool had the makeup to go and absolutely dominate. And I always felt, this is hard saying this, but I always felt if Pep took charge of Liverpool would have probably won a few more trophies. I think at the top at least, maybe not at the start, but when Liverpool gets to a point where they've got elite performers everywhere, You know, I think Liverpool would have
When I take issue with that, I want to move on quick because I do want to talk about Kelleher with everyone. But where I would take issue with that is I think there's a thing there where, for me, the flip side of it is you get 97 points, you get 92 points to your probability points.
Well, that's what I was that's what I was thinking, to be fair. I mean, there's such fine margins, isn't there? There's such nuance between winning a title and coming second, and that's so. I take that point. I absolutely appreciate that point, but I think generally speaking, Liverpool's players are worth 85 to 90 points roughly, and that was going to remain the case with Jurgen in charge or not. And I think that was generally lost in the media before the season, and naively stated by a lot of ex-players now turned pundits who thought Liverpool were going to fall off a cliff.
Right, okay. I've been cycling for 55 minutes. So whilst on the one hand it's been good that you've been doing all the talking and I haven't had to do that much, on the other hand I did want to do a good chat about Kelleher. And I'm conscious that I'm going to have to put another programme on as we go here and keep going, because I'm going to do it now out of sheer bloody mindedness and go beyond the hour. Ian, on Kelleher.
I mean, the host on the bike's no better laughs for us either.
Well, you know, I think you've all done brilliantly all the way through. Ian, I think and thank you very much for them, they were all great season reviews, by the way. Ian, with Kelleher, he's been a tremendous reserve goalkeeper. And part of the reason why that's the case is he actually had to play a lot of football matches. And some of that was optional. You know, the brilliant moments in finals is because the previous manager committed to him. But I also think, you know, some of that's not being optional, because the other goalkeeper's very unorthodox, and he's also unorthodox in the way he picks up injuries. Kelleher going, he couldn't go, I don't think, with any more affection.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think you've put it on your agenda. You know, is he the best number two maybe we've ever had? I think yes. You know, to get a number two who's played such a pivotal role in getting trophies over the line for Liverpool Football Club. You know, there is no other one who's done that. To play the way he did in those finals, to come in and I think the coming in bit and performing is really hard for any player, but for goalkeepers with such an isolated position, you know, to come in cold. And quite often hit really, really high levels. You know, it's hard to put a price on that. Yes, there were one or two mistakes in there, but all goalkeepers, even the very best one, even our very best one, does make mistakes. That does happen. But in the main, as I said, I referenced a couple before. You know, he's got more than a few big moments. I know people have been chatting about the fee and stuff. I don't think you're ever going to get kind of that much more with a season to go. I think they could have maybe got slightly more up front, and I think it's a 12.5 million rising to 18. I think, you know, you do the transfer game. We all play that game that you put on. I think you had him as 24 million in that.
Yeah.
In my head, I thought it would be round about between the 18 and 24 mark.
I just couldn't be bothered arguing with everyone. I'm not so similar to you on that one. I thought it'd be the lower end, but I just thought I thought for £6 million, I'll just end up having murder and I can't be bothered.
Which is fair. So I thought somewhere between 18 and 24, he might get that, depending on who they're dealing with. But I think there's also this thing where Liverpool respect and appreciate what the player's done. The fact they stuck around. He's not that young anymore. You know, he's still young for a goalkeeper, but he's not as young as maybe some people think. He has stuck around. So I think there's almost this thing where they've gone, you know what, you go with our best wishes, and we're not going to make this difficult for you in terms of the fee. So we're gonna be really, really kind of, you know, courteous around that. And if someone comes in with a decent enough fee, we're going to wave you on your way. And I think that's what they've done.
I think Brentford are getting a really good player. I think it's interesting. Flecken's an interesting keeper in that he never quite seemed right for Brentford, because I think we think of Brentford as being quite a muscular operation. So, but I think that's part of the reason why they thought Flecken would work, and why I think they think Kelleher will work. And then I think they'll have the idea of, no, we'll take care of a lot of that stuff. We'll win the headers from corners. We want you to set us on our way. And I think that Kelleher, that's the way Brentford play. And I think Kelleher will suit that.
Yeah, I'm really pleased. I think it's a really good fit for him. He's obviously been linked to quite a few clubs. I know Leeds were one of the names mentioned. West
I had no time for that one. For Leeds, as it long-term plans, and also for Kelleher.
Yeah, West Ham as well. But I mean, but Leeds in particular, and I think, you know, a couple of other clubs in and around the relegation zone. I wouldn't have liked for him to go to a club like that, because I think he, with the greatest of respect, Leeds is a great club, is a big club, but he's better than that. You know, He deserves to be playing for a club that isn't fielding a crazy amount of shots every single week. He deserves not to be relegated next season. Although, who knows, Leeds might surprise us. But yeah, I think he's just a top he's a top goalkeeper and a top human being as well. And I think, that's one thing that Liverpool is so good at, is assembling a squad of very good people as much as good players. And I think Kelleher is the epitome of that. He's so well liked around the training ground. And again, like Ian said, it would have been so easy for him to really try and agitate for a move at points over the past couple of seasons. I know he's been a little bit more vocal in the last year or two about wanting to move, and that is absolutely fair enough, because he's got more than enough credit in the bank. And there was actually a point, and it's you feel a bit daft saying this, because Alisson is in my opinion is the best in the world when he's fit. And Liverpool should be looking to keep him for as long as possible. But there was a point when Kelleher was deputising for him at the start of early on in the season, and I did think, with Mamardashvili coming in, is there a world where Liverpool part company with Alisson this summer and Kelleher and Mamardashvili fight for number one? Now, I think we've all seen in the second half of the season exactly why Alisson still is sort of undisputed number one, but his injury record obviously does complicate that a little bit. And I think that the greatest compliment that you can pay to Kelleher is, I don't think anyone ever really panicked when they saw that he was playing necessarily. He's not Alisson Becker, and with the best will in the world, there are very few players on this planet who can be anywhere close to Alisson Becker. But I still think he's been good enough and dependable enough that you haven't worried when he's played. And considering that I think Liverpool have had first choice goalkeepers over the years where you've panicked a little bit when they've played, for your number two to be in that position where you sort of think you're still in pretty safe hands is a credit to him. And yeah, I'm really pleased for him. I think it's a great move, and hopefully works out for him.
Excellent stuff. I'm on Kinross now. We've moved away from Arthur's Pass. I'm now cycling around Kinross. I've kept my Scottish element of this up, at least in the language. I think Kinross, Arthur's Pass was actually New Zealand. Just on to finish on Kelleher. Liverpool, in terms of the fee, 1 year left, but also everyone knows Mamardashvili is there. Josh, I think it was going to be a difficult one for Liverpool to do much else other than get the player a good home and have everyone stay happy. And Liverpool, I think, want to have a relationship with Brentford.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not that surprised by the fee. I think it's reasonable all round. Actually, I think Brentford are getting a good deal. Liverpool are getting a decent fee for a player who's got 1 year left on his contract, and going into next season would probably be third choice. So, to get what is it, potentially 18 million for your third choice goalkeeper. I mean, if you're complaining about that, your business is pretty good. So, and I think what I'd add to what's been said already as well, I'm just intrigued to see how he does, because I think there's been a lot of calls, hasn't there, to be like, for Kelleher to be a starter somewhere, and there's been a lot of calls like he's good enough to succeed Alisson eventually, and so keep him around and things like that. I think there's always been a bit of a question mark with that for me, but to actually see him starting every week for a Premier League team, who are going to use his build-up qualities, hopefully, keeping an eye on his post-shot XG and things like that to see if he's conceding more than he's expected to concede. It's just going to be interesting to me, because generally speaking, whenever people ask about Kelleher, especially about his numbers and that, the easy answer is just like, well, he doesn't play enough, so we don't know. So to get him 38 games, hopefully he does well.
Excellent stuff. Just dead quick, has anyone got any concerns about Wirtz? Do you think it's delayed because there's the match and there's a bit of horse trading between the two clubs? It's a lot of money. Anyone concerned?
Well, the fact it's a lot of money is why it's delayed.
It's it's going to be the club record deal. It's going to be close to breaking the British transfer record. It might even do it. Those sorts of deals, it's not as easy as a release clause. And yeah, I think it will be fine. I think it's just negotiations ongoing.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe because Romano come out and listen, some people will take more of what he says kind of to heart than others. But I think he said that it might get done quickly, so therefore when it doesn't get done that quickly, people maybe jump onto bits. But as the guys have said, you're talking about a massive fee. There's going to be complications there. There's talk about, potentially they might want a player from Moses as well. Who knows what that?
Yeah, that'll be its own complex.
So that can make things more complex. Or obviously, there's national games happening as well, so he's away. So maybe if it gets to the back end of this week and we're not hearing anything, maybe I'll start to think, is there a problem? Are there a few bumps in the road there? But at the minute, I'm fairly okay with it.
Okay, excellent stuff. It's been the Anfield Wrap, brought to you by Peloton, and it has been for an extended period of time. Huge thank you to them. They are the official fitness digital partners of Liverpool Football Club, and I've enjoyed being on it. I should have got on it more over the course of the year, but I've made up for it now.
You do all the shows on the bike,
for the rest of the day. No, that's nonsense. Do not hold me to that one. I've done this one, and thank you very much indeed to them and to everyone who's been here and put up with this slightly mad arrangement. Huge thank you for Jordan Singleton, because you could see this because of him. Andy Heaton for making the sound work all the way through, and for their infinite patience, Josh Williams, Beth Lindop and Ian Ryan. That's the Anfield Wrap, Liverpool champions. More of this sort of thing if you want it on Gutter, if you subscribe. See you later on.